Welcome back to Lippincott Talk. I am your host, Josiah Lippincott. Today, American diplomats are headed to Islamabad, Pakistan to hopefully negotiate an end to the Iran war. I want to talk about foreign policy today. It's insofar as I have a subject matter expertise as an expert, as a credentialed expert. This is my bread and butter. I'm interested in war. I'm interested in foreign policy. I think you see the issues of justice most clearly between nations and in the context of international relations. And I've made no secret of the fact that I am opposed to this conflict. I do not think the United States should have gone to war with Iran. I don't believe the justifications provided for the war make sense. I think we could have accomplished our real national interests, which I consider the protection of person and property, without the war. So from the beginning, I have favored a diplomatic solution to our relationship with Iran. I've supported this for years. I've written on this in the past, but especially in the last year since the strikes on Fordow last June. And so I'm disappointed by the war. It's something one of the things I said prior to the election is that Donald Trump hadn't started a new war, right? He'd drop bombs and stuff like that in the Middle East, but everyone does that. But I could plausibly make that argument prior to the election, rightfully so. Not just plausibly, rightfully. Trump had not launched a new war, a new conflict. Well, now he has. And thankfully, it has not been as ruinous as it could be. And you never really know how an event will unfold until it actually happens. And the reality is the United States has been able to bomb Iran and do a lot of damage to its economy and military with a very low number of casualties, which is good, right? Well, about a dozen dead, right? 13 dead, which isn't good, obviously, but it could be a lot worse. It's better than hundreds dead or something like that. You can compare it to the first Gulf War. So in comparison, the United States, and there's been real damage, of course, to American bases. I am surprised. That has been the most surprising thing to me, is the extent to which American bases in the Persian Gulf are vulnerable to enemy fire. And there has been, I think, estimates range probably 50 to 70 billion. The Pentagon's asking for a $200 billion supplement to replenish the stocks of munitions and build more. So this war has been expensive, but the overall cost compared to everything else the government spends money on has been low. Now, in a way, that's part of the problem. And I don't mean to say that I wish America took more casualties. I don't. But part of the issue confronting modern foreign policy is that the costs aren't felt immediately. Because they're long-term, and because you can't connect them easily between administrations or between policymakers, it is the case that American decisions abroad, often it takes a long time for the true impact of those decisions to become manifest. And so American presidents can take actions that they otherwise would not, and the voters allow them to do this because there's a disconnect. The voter doesn't feel it right away. And one of the remarkable things to me about the conflict is that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, or effective closure, people fight over the definition of wars, or the definition of words, that the number of ships, of course, going through the strait is down significantly from its peak. And there has been a decline. People fight about this, but there has been a real disruption and real decline to the amount of oil on the international market. And the good news is, so far, it has not been catastrophic. And I say this as someone who supports Trump. I don't want him to have a recession on his watch. And so I'm very glad that the disruption to energy supplies in the Middle East turns out, or has so far, not been catastrophic to the American economy or to the global economy. Again, the problem, of course, is it will take some time for the world and for the economy at large to absorb the damage done by the conflict. And as I said earlier, I believe that there were meaningful alternatives the United States had available to war. That we could have a relationship with Iran that is productive for both parties and is in our interest, that does not involve going to war with that regime. And I say this because one of the issues, and that I see online is people are like betting. They want there's delusion and derangement, both sides. On the one hand, you have people who are delusional about American foreign policy. This is more common now, where like every move of the American state is genius because, like, I was seeing people like celebrate like America just signed a bilateral agreement with Morocco over defense, and it's like, bro, this is all about sea lanes, bro. We're going to control waterways and sea lanes. And if we sign bilateral defense agreements, they're bilateral, bro. We have joint partners, and we're going to work with them in order to secure sea lanes. To my mind, it's ridiculous to like to my mind, the idea that this is important is ridiculous, right? Like, America has tons of bilateral agreements with all kinds of governments all over the planet, right? Morocco, for instance, has been a major non-NATO U.S. ally. It's a designation that the American government has. They've been that way for 20 years, right? There's nothing new under the sun when it comes to, yes, Americans, there's there's an exercise, African Lion, with something like 10,000 African and European and American troops conduct this big exercise. There's this kind of stuff is done in the South Pacific all the time. I was part of what is it? There's one in Australia, Talisman Sabre, right? We helped work with that. It's a big joint multilateral exercise. America does all these things all the time. So you have, on the one hand, you have people who like look at some new deal coming down the pipe and they're like, bro, this is so important, bro. Like, it's 7D chess. On the other hand, which is really not true, it's like, what is the goal of the 7D chess? Like, how do you know when you've won? And because the benefits and costs of foreign policy are so distant from Americans in their daily lives, it really doesn't show up directly. Like, it's a kind of online entertainment. So you have people on the one hand who are convinced that everything the State Department is doing right now is like a part of a 7D chess strategy to like control the world and stop China. On the other hand, you have people who believe that Donald Trump is going to single-handedly cause the collapse of the world order and kill a bunch of people, and it'll result in civil war across the globe. On both counts, I really think neither is correct, right? I think Trump's stated reasons for wanting to go to war with Iran, his concern over the 1979 hostage crisis, that the United States needed revenge, that we needed to prevent terrorism against Israel because of October 7th, the argument that Iran has supported regional proxies that have gone to war with the United States and they need to be stopped for those reasons. When Trump says stuff like that, I believe him. Those are the real reasons he's engaged in the conflict. Will this conflict mean a restructuring of the current world order? Probably not. American presidents have bombed all kinds of Middle Eastern countries. This is a consistent, normal part of American involvement abroad. What will have changed at the end of this war? Best case scenario. This is what I'm hoping for, and I see diplomats headed to Islamabad. I'm praying for them. I hope they succeed. What I would like to see is a grand bargain between the United States and Iran that normalizes relations and results in an end to sanctions and a cooling of diplomatic tensions. That is in our interest. That is what I want to see accomplished. Iran gives up its nuclear program. We sign some kind of convention or agreement regarding the Strait of Hormuz and keeping it open to freedom of the seas. We normalize relations, get rid of the sanctions. You get some kind of aid package, probably need to do this for Gaza so that Iran can justify shutting down expenditures on its regional proxies. And then the United States disentangles itself. Why should we do this? Because the goal should be the defense of person and property of the American people. Monkeying with the Middle East does not benefit that goal, right? It harms that goal. We spend money and we see Americans die in the Middle East. Wait a second. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. We should be trying to save money and not see Americans die. And so many of the arguments and justifications for involvement are predicated on an inability to see how the problems in that region are the byproduct of past American policy. And so on the one hand, I wish the war had not happened. I feel disappointed that it occurred. Again, one of the things I said, Trump has not started any new wars. Well, I can't say that now. I don't like that I can't say that. I think Trump has in the past been very good in terms of just his instinctual sense of American foreign policy. I'm not saying that he and I share the exact same view of foreign policy. I'm saying I think his instincts have been good. One of the things Trump has said about the Middle East is that all that's there is blood and sand. So true, King. So true. There's nothing there worth having. The oil. We can get the oil without having bases there. That's how the Chinese do it. Like, why is it that you may notice, like, there are countries that buy tons of oil from the Middle East, have no bases there, don't need any bases there. They have relationships with oil producing regions that do not require them to have massive taxpayer expenditure on naval forces. Part of that may be because the American government is subsidizing them. But I am increasingly convinced that American foreign policy is simply animated by delusion about means and ends. We don't understand the connection between what the money we're spending and the results produced. And because we don't see the alternatives, and they haven't been thought through, you then get locked into this framework where it's a zombie foreign policy. It just guides you unthinkingly to the same point. It's that you have these dead ideas that just are reanimated consistently by interests in DC or a kind of dead and ossified thinking. One of them is like the idea that Iran is a global terror threat. Nope. Iran has regional interests. It's locked in a Cold War with Israel. It has problems with its Arab powers. There's a long history here going back 1,000, more than 1,000 years. Like 1,500 years of tension, relationship, Cold War stuff. It's easy then to adopt a meme foreign policy when your diplomats and your experts don't really know anything, and when they're in service to foreign interests, or they're concerned more with what's going on abroad than their actual real interests here. So a lot of this results from a lack of clarity in the framing. So if you're framing it in terms of, okay, how are the Iranians going to get here, right? Well, they could fly here. Not if we have border controls, right? Then they can't get in. Because it's hard. There's a big ocean in between. There's only a few ports of entry. There are only a few airports. We can put security there. Then how would they get here, right? Basic question. They could fire a missile. Yeah, lots of people have missiles, but they don't fire them at us. Why is that? Well, because we have a lot of missiles too. And so right there off the bat, we have nuclear weapons. We have ballistic missiles. We have twice as many nuclear submarines as the rest of the world combined. We have all these aircraft carriers, all these destroyers, all these ships, all these weapons, all these Marines. Okay, so what is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard going to land in Los Angeles? They're going to airdrop into Appalachia? And by the way, how would that go for them if they did manage to get here? Plot twist, they would get annihilated, right? There's just no way. And if you look at the actual history between the United States and the Middle East, wait a second. On 9/11, 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudis. All of them were Sunni. Wait a second. But the Iranians are Persian and Shia. So wait a second. Saudi Arabia is our ally, and Iran is our enemy, but Osama bin Laden was a Saudi, and most of his hijackers were Saudis, and also there's pretty good evidence that he had some support from the Saudi government. Right? This is a question. Questions are raised. I'm going to use the passive voice. This raises questions about what exactly is going on there. And I'm not saying we should have tensions with Saudi Arabia. I'm saying the sheer facts make one question exactly what it is that we're accomplishing abroad. What exactly is our relationship to the Middle East? So again, you have, it's super important that Iran has democracy. Wait a second. They do have democracy. They have a parliament, the Majlis. It's like 290 members. Women are allowed to vote in Iran and have been able to vote since the beginning of the Islamic Republic. I believe they received the vote in 1963 under the Shah. The Ayatollah Khomeini kept that in place when they adopted their constitution. Iran's parliament has 17 of the 290 members, last I checked, are women. Now, do I care about this? No, I don't care about spreading democracy abroad, so this doesn't register with me. But it's bizarre to see America's foreign policy class talk about democracy in the Middle East. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy. They don't have a legislature. You can think that's based, you can think that's cringe, you could be horrified by that. The point is, so many of these narratives that just, Iran is a tyrannical Nazi Germany-like state. And it's like, well, wait a second. They have an elected legislature, elected president. They have a bizarre arrangement between their religious cleric and the government itself. And that is a complicated thing. But they do have this constitutional liberal democratic norms, separation of powers, courts, legislature, president, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, this is a long-standing tradition for them, back to 1906 to 1911. But then you have, that's the first period of the Iranian constitution, which the clerics at the time, at least some of them, supported. It's like, and I don't say all this to be like, oh my God, Iran is an amazing country and they're just like us and they have democratic values. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm pointing out is you can't indulge in discussion about the Middle East that's disconnected from facts. Like the sort of meme arguments about democracy and authoritarianism don't hold in this case. Discussion about terrorism. Okay, what is with all these Sunni terrorists? Like, Iran fought ISIS for its own complicated reasons, but wait a second, like, ISIS is bad, right? Well, and then until al-Shara, the guy who was the Al-Qaeda emir, Al-Qaeda he's an emir or commander of some Al-Qaeda branch, the Al-Nusra Front, in Syria. And now he's like in charge of Syria now as president. Like, well, wait a second. And this guy's like going all over Europe and meeting with all these foreign leaders. Wait a second, right? Like, I thought Al-Qaeda was super bad and ISIS was super bad. Iran was fighting these people. And so what's the connection here? I was digging into the history of Iran with Al-Qaeda. And it turns out one of the things alleged by American officials in the Bush administration was that Al-Qaeda operatives were allowed to flee into Iran, which was true. And this included Saad bin Laden, the son of Osama bin Laden. So it turns out Saad was apparently autistic and neurodivergent Islamic terrorist, and apparently wasn't actually that good at the terrorism thing, and kind of like was killed on accident in an American airstrike. It's kind of amusing in its way. Apparently several of Osama's children had like emotional and behavioral issues. I'm shocked by this. Anyway, he was in Iran, but the Iranian government had like arrested him, and there are claims that the Iranian government was holding Al-Qaeda operatives hostage in Iran to use as a bargaining chip for diplomacy. Now, God only knows if that's true, or what the actual facts on the ground were, or the real multiple factions and their interrelation, and maybe Hezbollah wanted to work with Al-Qaeda because of their joint enemy in the United States, or maybe they were opposed because at another time because of their differing religious beliefs and geopolitical considerations and blah, 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 blah. That whole region is super complicated, and there's a bunch of different factions. They're all warring with each other. There isn't really a good guy anywhere in that region. That includes Israel, by the way. And when you look at it, this is all an argument for disentangling, but it's also an argument against not getting memes stuck in your mind about what's actually happening, right? Like, what is the real effect of bombing Iran going to be in the long term? Well, it might be that we get a peace deal. I hope so, right? It may be, again, I think that was available before. Like, Iran has had negotiations with the United States in the JCPOA, for instance, in which they gave up their nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Something similar, I think, will probably be what comes out of the war now, but framed in such a way that you don't have, money changing hands. It's going to be because that was a big argument by the Zionist and anti-Iran faction in the American government against the deal later. I mean, it's all stupid in the sense of what is our real interest here and how is it being served by ongoing conflict? Do these narratives make any sense? It's like people comparing Iran to Nazi Germany. And then I have to point out, it's like, no, the second largest Jewish community in the Middle East lives in Iran. You can say that's good or bad. I don't care, personally. I don't care. It doesn't, but it's a meme. It's not a real argument, right? It's like saying, like, oh, we support democracy. No, we don't. We're allied with Saudi Arabia. That doesn't make any sense. If we were committed to constitutional values, just based off of that norm, we'd be closer to Iran instead of to Saudi Arabia. But that's not the case because of a whole host of complicated political reasons, most of which don't make any sense. The best case scenario would be some kind of that the United States can buy oil from both of those countries and not have immigrants from either, or very limited migration, right? Like, it's amazing to me to log online and see a bunch of members of the Iranian diaspora, bunch of them in America, hundreds of thousands, I think, and they're calling for war, America to invade their former home country. And it's like, you're not assimilating here. That's a problem. You need to stop doing that. And by the way, this is a product of other foreign policy decisions made in the past. So again, when I look at this conflict, thank God it wasn't worse. I really do. I'm grateful that we did not take more casualties. I'm grateful more damage wasn't done. I'm really glad there isn't a recession. I say this as someone who supports Trump. Recession is bad for Trump. It's bad for his domestic agenda. We have spent now 2 months, nearly, talking about what's going on in the Middle East. And that drives me crazy because we have all these other things way more important happening in America. And Trump is winning real battles here, but instead you have everybody's freaked out about Iran because of the threat to the market economy. It's obviously in tension with things he said prior. And that's really true. Like, he has talked about like opposition to Iran, but the thing Americans took away was Middle Eastern war is bad. And the bulk of those people joined the Trump camp or have been part of that camp from the beginning. And so it's disappointing and it's difficult because you have this conflict abroad that's sucking up time and attention. And on the one hand, you have people who want to see in all the 7D chess. There's no 7D chess here. The United States, quite literally, can control every sea lane in the world right now without any bilateral defense agreements. Why? Because we have a huge Navy. And what does that mean by control? We could sink a bunch of ships if we wanted to. We could sink every oil tanker on Earth if we wanted. We could drop nuclear bombs on all of Iran and kill 93 million people. This is a sign of our great power as a country. And the question becomes, what purpose would that serve? Like, what is the point of controlling these waterways? Like, what is it that we will get? Leverage over China. Why do we need that? Like, what is the real threat that China poses to the United States? And I'm not saying there isn't one. I'm saying, what is it? Because what I see, the biggest threat is Chinese migration to the United States has an effect politically that benefits the American left. And you also see a large Chinese cohort within the United States that's pushing for their own political interests. They want to transfer taxpayer dollars and American resources and time and attention to their own benefit. That I don't think is good. I think we should stop that. I don't see how signing bilateral agreements with Indonesia and talking about the Strait of Malacca solves those two problems. You know what would solve those problems? Repealing Hart-Celler and reducing American involvement abroad. Because one of the reasons you see a ton, so for one, we have a bunch of foreigners who come here, become citizens, and then they push for policies to benefit their country back home. That's bad. Or if they're opposed and they want war there or whatever. And it's like, no, we need to stop doing this. I don't like it when immigrant diasporas in America are pushing for their preferred policy. It's like, this is not in our interest. This is in your interest. You didn't fully shed your old identity when you came here. And this is a real problem. We need to stop being so involved abroad in these ways. It's not good for us as a people. And we need to think about our own good. Our good, I think, is found in peace and prosperity. In my view, war has a singular purpose, restoring the state of peace. And you do that by killing your enemies. And who are your enemies? People who quite literally threaten to kill you. And I don't mean they said a mean thing online. I mean, they have guns, they're at your doorstep, they're trying to harm you. And there's some easy ways to prevent that harm. You can use force and violence. You can also preserve peace by not giving offense. That's another way that you can secure your own interest, by not doing things that would cause people to hate you and want to come harm you. And of course, you can't control how other people perceive you fully, but you can take some very basic steps that prevent problems from springing up abroad. An easy way is by not getting involved, by not being a part of whatever monkey business is going on in whatever, pit, third world, hellhole that we now have to be involved in. It's like, we don't have to do that, right? Like, we don't benefit from getting sucked into regional politics. And here's a good example. In 2004, in October, Osama bin Laden released a video statement, taking responsibility for the 9/11 attacks. In that statement, he begins by asking a rhetorical question. Why is it that Al-Qaeda did not attack, say, Sweden, and instead attacked the United States? And he lists as reasons American involvement in the Middle East. And specifically, one of the things that stands out is he points to, in 1982, the United States, Osama bin Laden alleged, the United States was involved in bombing Lebanon and blowing up buildings there. And it's true, the United States was involved in bombing Lebanon repeatedly from the 1950s onward as part of global peacekeeping, Cold War efforts, whatever. But the point is, the result of that involvement, which most Americans could not articulate, like they would have no, like I think most Americans could not find Lebanon on a map based, but there's a good reason for that. They don't care. They're not interested. It doesn't matter to them. They don't want to be involved in civil war abroad, complex politics between Christians, Sunni Arabs, Shia, Hezbollah, Israel, Syria, Jordan, blah. I mean, whoa, what a mess, right? Most Americans know very little about what's going on there. But the point is, Osama bin Laden knew a lot about that conflict. And it motivated him to hate America and to want revenge for what he perceived as an attack on Muslims. And the question then becomes, just to open it as a question, what good did American involvement serve in Lebanon? Like, what was produced by that involvement? I'm not here to justify Osama bin Laden, obviously. Bad, right? Terrorism, bad. But the point is, our foreign policy abroad often has effects that we do not foresee in the moment. And those effects can later become a huge problem. And they can be avoided by a foreign policy that does not look to give offense abroad and actively looks to avoid other people's problems. And that doesn't mean it will always work. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't defend ourselves or we need to be, we should have responded to 9/11, right? You blow up buildings, you kill Americans. That doesn't work. But the point is, a lot of this would have been completely preventable by not being involved as deeply in the Middle East as we were. That's just simply a fact. And we don't know what the long-term consequences of our involvement abroad will be. And the best thing to do is don't do it in the first place. We can get all the benefits we need economically through just letting Americans trade abroad. That's a them problem, right? Some business wants to go buy oil, have at it. Good for you. That doesn't need to involve the American taxpayer in any way whatsoever. And you can do the whole freedom of the seas thing. That doesn't mean you need to put military bases on every single Middle Eastern country. Not necessary, right? Middle Eastern countries want to sell oil, right? The people there want to make money. They can do that by selling to the United States. Great. They do that by selling to Japan, to China, to whoever else is buying oil from them. Okay, wonderful. That doesn't mean we need to be buddy-buddy and monkey with their insane internal politics. That has nothing to do with us. Again, I want to emphasize the importance of neutrality and disengagement as a way of averting conflicts that otherwise happen, right? Ronald Reagan monkeying with Lebanon had real effects for New Yorkers later. And that doesn't mean that Reagan intended that. That's not what I'm saying at all. But my point is, our policies abroad have follow-on effects that we cannot always foresee, and they're often bad for us. But they're disconnected. We don't have them connected in our minds, and we don't think through cause and effect. And again, everyone wants to moralize foreign policy. Like the real core is like, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? And I think it's and there's a truth to that. You should think about morality in foreign policy and in your life. But it's tied to the good. It's tied to the right thing is the one that benefits you. And the best thing to do is to live in a world where there's peace, to have scientific progress and civilization and prosperity. Where you can, there's a great verse, and I think it's in Micah. It's talking about every man will rest under the shade of his own oak tree. It's like, that's great. That's what I want, right? I want to rest in the shade of my property, right? My tree, my vineyard. Enjoy the fruits of my own labor. And when you look at American foreign policy and its animating purpose, it's so often disconnected from the good. There's a lack of thinking about consequences. And so all that to say is we need to avoid the two dangers here. On the one hand, you have delusion. On the other hand, you have derangement. And we also need to think clearly about what our real interest is. And I'm really hoping that we secure it here in the Middle East. The best thing would be to not have anyone discussing Iran. It would be to have some sort of grand bargain that brings about stability, normalization of relations, no more sanctions, and then we can have peace and prosperity. And we can buy oil from Iran and we can ignore them. That would be awesome. I look forward to the day where I don't have to listen to anything about the axis of resistance and how base the Shah would be from some member of the Iranian diaspora and actually Israel's our greatest ally. They're not. They're functionally useless in a lot of ways. Again, none of this is not about our good. And we need to be more hard-headed in our foreign policy. We need to stop giving offense abroad, but not for our own sake. Like, how does it benefit us to have people be mad at us for no reason? We don't need to do anything that relates to, like, we can avoid this. The fundamental point, the justification is always, oh, we need to do this thing. We need. We don't need. I assure you, we don't need. And if you were to ask policymakers to describe what the actual real benefits of their policies have been, they would not be able to provide a clear answer. The American foreign policy establishment is corrupt and stupid, right? And that hasn't changed because you brought in Donald Trump. Trump is better than what we've had, much better. This is great that we don't have a bunch of crazy liberals in there. But the point is, at the same time, these institutions are still rotten. And even if you bring good people in there who want to make things better, you still run up against the fact that the core questions have not been answered, and you have all these factions struggling to power, and they're corrupt and stupid in almost every case. So what's the solution to all of this? In my view, it's disentanglement. Focus on domestic issues. Focus on domestic wins. Let the economy grow. Secure the border. Enforce law and order. Make it so that we have a healthy, prosperous country going forward, right? The goal is the new American golden age. I want to see prosperity. I don't want to monkey with the problems in the Middle East. That doesn't have anything to do with our good. Spending money to kill terrorists, Sunni, Salafi, Wahhabist, Al-Nusra, Syria, Jordan, Persian, Azerbaijan, Caspian Sea, Strait of Hormuz. Whoop! I want that gone. I don't want to think about those problems. I want to think about, how do we lower the murder rate? How do we build more roads? How do we fix our infrastructure? How do we lower taxes on Americans? How do we encourage prosperity? How do we ensure that we have better technological development? How do we encourage the country to be more unified? How do we do those things? How can we have a solid culture and history? How can we stop anti-white racism within our institutions? That's a real problem that we confront right now. Doesn't have anything to do with what's going on 7,000 miles away in Tehran, right? The mullahs do not have bearing on what's being taught in American colleges and universities backed up by my tax dollars, right? They're irrelevant. That's the key point. It's irrelevant. And all it does when we get involved there is distract time, attention, resources, and really human lives away from problems we have right here, right now. These things are not connected. And it is cope to try and act like they're all, no, they're not united. They're not united. Oh, it's all part of a big 7D chess. It's not. And it's okay to say that. It's okay to say that the plan is not nearly as comprehensive as you may want it to seem from your status of like reading X or Twitter.com. That's okay. It's okay. The clearest parts of Trump's plan were make the country a better place to live. And he's done real things to make that policy a reality, to bring about good things. On the other hand, there's stuff that distracts. And I put the Middle East as a category, the Middle East as an item in that category. That's where it goes. Distraction, stupid, does not have anything to do with what's good for us. Bothering with China, same thing. I'll tell you this right now. The lockdowns in 2020 were not caused because of Xi Jinping, right? You know who locked me in my home in 2020? It was Gavin Newsom. It was Gretchen Whitmer. That's who made the real policies that really harm my life. Xi Jinping, not part of that calculus at all, right? Yeah, that dude was like very much off in the distance, bothering with his own problems. The reason we have issues here today is our government is crazed and animated by radical ideology. And that needs to stop. We have to do something about that. Fighting these wars in the Middle East has nothing to do with that project. And by the way, the ramifications and follow-on effects of our involvement abroad are bad, almost always. So the best thing to do is have diplomacy and peace. I want to encourage President Trump and his staff. I want you to get the photo op like you had with North Korean Kim Jong-un. That was great. That was a win. By the way, don't hear about Kim Jong-un anymore. Nobody's talking about that guy. This is good. Good. Right? Because he doesn't matter, right? He's sitting there with his ballistic missiles and, in their like tyrannical, totalitarian bug hive. Wonderful. I'm so happy for them. Doesn't have anything to do with me. Don't need to worry about it, right? Not my problem. If that's what the North Koreans want, or maybe they don't want it, not my problem. Not my problem. Right? As an American citizen, my interests are here. And I want to get Iran into the North Korea box, where it's like, nobody talks about this. Not important. Not important. We can do a photo op. I want Trump to get the photo op and a medal, the Nobel Peace Prize. Awesome. Good. That's what I want. That's what I want for Trump. So he can focus on the things domestically where he's really good. Law and order. Great. Securing the border. Great. Economy is like ready to boom with the old AI stuff. I really think there could be real economic growth from that. That's awesome. I want that for the country. I want that for Trump. But it means to focus. So anyway, this concludes today's show. And hopefully this is helpful. Just framing the way I think about this. Again, focus on what really matters. Focus on what really matters. Use your mind. That's the key. Use your mind. Focus on what matters. And if you start there, a lot of things will begin to make sense. You can follow me across a bunch of different platforms. I'm on X at @JLippincott. We finally got rid of the underscore. I bought a new one at @JLippincott, simply. And then I'm also on Substack, Regime Critic. This podcast is being uploaded to Apple Podcasts and Spotify, which is awesome. And you can also find me on YouTube. Again, I want to thank you for listening, and thank you for engaging. I want to encourage you to do so. I'm happy to hear your thoughts. It helps me think. Maybe you think what I'm saying is super bad. Wonderful. You can say that in a DM, or you can put it on the post and tell me your thoughts. I appreciate it. And I want to encourage you all to keep thinking and keep working. We're aiming for the new golden age, and we can have it. This has been Lippincott Talk. I am your host, Josiah Lippincott. Keep the faith.